today is August 4th, 2021, and I am here at the Cumberland County Historical Society with Paul Richards. So Paul, thank you so much for coming in today.
Thanks for having me.
I always like to start off by asking a little bit about where you grew up and what your family life was like. So I have here that you grew up in the Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania area. So
Yeah, grew up in northeast Pennsylvania in Wilkes-Barre, right downtown, not down in the shopping district, but in the residential district, close to all the schools. And it was, we had a big family, 6 kids in our family. Different times. My dad worked multiple jobs to, pay the bills, and my mom had the biggest full-time job, taking care of 6 kids and raising 6 kids. It was, I look back at it and very thankful for that experience. Wilkes-Barre at that time was a community that very family friendly. We kind of wandered all over town, and we knew every backyard and every alley, and you go playing games at night, and running through yards, and you knew when to duck because there was a clothesline, and you knew who had the fences you could get over and the ones you couldn't, and so it was fun growing up there, and it was a time when we'd get up in the morning and we'd leave the house, and as long as you were back by dinner time, it was fine. It was you learned to be creative. It wasn't all structured activities, although we spent a ton of time at the pool, obviously, because that became my love and my profession. But very much kind of on your own, doing your own thing. And I look today at all the camps. There's a camp for every single thing you can imagine now, and I know times have changed and there are reasons for it. But I think the structure has created a little bit of a problem with creativity, that kids sometimes just don't know how to just have fun. Everything they've done, they've had a coach, they've had a supervisor, they've had something, and that just wasn't how I grew up, and nobody had the money to do that anyway. If there was a camp, you couldn't afford to go. You started working as soon as you were able to. My family was very involved with the YMCA in Wilkes-Barre. My dad was a volunteer there all the time. My brothers and I grew up there. It was about a mile from our house, so we would walk to the Y and do our thing and walk home. We're probably there 4 days during the week, and then pretty much all day on Saturday. And it was an adventure on Saturday that you'd go in the morning and you'd have gym, you'd have swim, you'd have some other activities. There was a craft shop there was a little cafeteria, we'd have lunch, and then we would leave and we would go into downtown Wilkes-Barre, and we'd go to the Bosler, or not the Bos, it was the Oosterhout Free Library, and from there go out the back door, and there was a museum like this that we could go into, and then we would walk over town and we'd go to a movie. And I can remember specifically paying 25 cents for a movie, and we'd go to a matinee on Sunday, and then the day was over. But it was a fun way to grow up, and the schools were all neighborhood schools. So my high school was from 7th to 12th grade. So you became part of a community, and I know that's not what they like now. There's more stratification in education now than there was then. But it was kind of neat that you were part of that high school community for 6 years. And I was actually part of it for even longer, because my older brother, who was 2 years older than me, when he went to high school in 7th grade, the swimming coach at that time said to him, "Don't you have a brother?" And he said, "Yeah, but he's in 5th grade." And the high school coach said, "Well, it doesn't matter. Tell him he needs to be here tomorrow." So I started swimming with my high school when I was actually in 5th grade. That was back when the PIAA didn't really have very many rules about anything, and everybody just kind of did what they wanted to do. And I guess we were middle class. I don't know. I don't. We worked for what we had. We had jobs. I started working at the Y when I was young. I worked lifeguarding jobs. Every summer you got as many jobs as you could to make as much money as you could to kind of get you through the school year, so you had money to go to a football game, go to a dance, do whatever you wanted to do. So it was a good time. I enjoyed it.
I was going to ask, you mentioned you had an older brother who was 2 years older than you. Were you the second oldest, or?
I had older sister, older brother, then myself, and then a younger sister and 2 younger brothers. And the span of years of the kids in our family is actually 20 years. So it was almost like 2 different families. The first 4 were in this one era, and then as people started moving on, then the next 4 who were just. I remember my 2 youngest brothers. I remember them being born, and helping take care of them. But then I was gone, so I wasn't there for much of their young years, their development. So kind of, but it's been interesting. Because now I get to watch them as they kind of go through their mid-years, and their families are growing, and it's been kind of fun. And my youngest brother is actually a Franciscan monk, and that was just a decision he made probably about 6 or 7 years ago. He was working as he was a psychological counselor at State Correctional Institute in Camp Hill, and just said, I can't do this anymore. And he had spent some time at seminary. He thought he wanted to go that route. That ended up not being what he wanted. And he explored the Franciscans and just finally said, that's what I want to do. And it's quite a process. And you need to divest yourself of everything. And so he left central Pennsylvania. He was from Elizabethtown. That's where he was living and working. But he left central Pennsylvania with one bag and went to San Francisco. And has never been happier. He just loves, he has a purpose, he serves, he gives, he takes care of people, and just really, he's thriving on what he's doing. So I'm really happy for him.
Yeah. So you talked a little bit about your parents. I always like to ask, what their names were, and what they, you mentioned your mother stayed at home and raised 6 kids, and then your father's occupation as well.
Yeah, my mom, her name was Jane. Her middle name was her maiden name, Parker. She was actually, I'm pretty sure she was born in Berwick, Pennsylvania, which is about 2 hours north of here. She was an only child, and my dad, I'm named after my dad, so he's Paul Lewis Richards, I'm Paul Lewis Richards Jr., and my son is Paul Lewis Richards III. And I think my son has arrived at the point that I arrived at eventually, where I was actually thankful for that name. Because initially it was like, I don't have my own identity, I share this name with my dad, I don't have this. And then I finally, it took me a while growing up and to get mature enough to realize that it was actually an honor, to have your dad's name. So my dad did a lot of different things, but what I remember the most was his professional career was in sales, and he worked for transportation companies. So he worked for a trucking company called Branch Motors. He had worked for a couple trucking companies before that. But while he was doing that, he was also running the family machine shop in Wilkes-Barre, because his dad had a machine shop and died very young, and that was the only income for my grandmother. So my dad continued to run that machine shop after his work. He would come home and he'd have supper like in 5 minutes, and then head out the door and go to the machine shop, and he'd work till like 11 o'clock at the machine shop. And for a while after that, and I don't remember this, but I remember my mom telling me, was that he'd come home, have dinner, he'd go to the machine shop, he'd leave the machine shop at 11 o'clock and go to the Stegmeyer Brewery, and he would weld beer barrels until like 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning. He'd come home, sleep for like 3 hours, and get up and do it all over again. So I never had to work quite that hard, but it was a clear lesson in work ethic, and also in taking care of your family. You do what you need to do to whatever it is to take care of your family. And I got to work in the machine shop when I was in high school, and one summer afterwards, and then 1972 Hurricane Agnes came through, and South Wilkes-Barre was just totally destroyed. Our house was about 3 blocks from the river. We had, I think, about 12 feet of water at our house. We had moved things up onto the second floor. We had moved things in the basement up on top of counters. Thought they would be okay. And we ended up that we had 3 feet of water on the second floor. So pretty much everything was destroyed. But I got to work in the machine shop before that happened, and it was a great lesson, and not just in a skill, and I wouldn't call myself a machinist, my dad was, but I learned what it meant to do hard work, because it was hard. When you work with metal like that, your hands get sliced up all the time, and it's so sharp you don't feel it when it happens. You only feel it at the end of the night when you go to wash your hands. And you put the soap on your hands, and it's like you're screaming, like, how did this happen? So he really, I think, instilled in me a work ethic that I valued, all my professional career. I just, you just did whatever you needed to do to get the job done. You didn't watch the clock. You didn't worry about how many hours you worked. You just did it and got it done. And I think that was probably why, as soon as I was able to, that I was going out looking for jobs. And also I wanted a bike. And, they couldn't buy bikes for 6 kids. And so I had, you wouldn't remember this, but people who are as old as I do, there used to be a very tiny magazine called the TV Guide that came out weekly. And it was the whole week's worth of, at that time, cable channels didn't exist, so it wasn't that much. But I didn't want to do a paper route because it was too much with swimming, which what I was doing all the time. But I figured I could do this TV Guide route, which was once a week, and I could make some money. So I went out and solicited, customers, and I had a TV Guide route of about 85 or 90 customers that in like a 5 or 6 block radius. Actually, a friend of mine and we split up the neighborhood. And we said, you can take from this block down to here and over, and I'll take here over. And we both went out and we built these TV Guide routes. And I remember when I had my eye on a red Schwinn 10-speed, because I wanted a new bike and they couldn't do it. And I remember that's how I got it, was doing this TV Guide route. And I took that bike to college with me, and the first week I was in school was stolen. So there was a lesson. So you need to lock your bike up better and do that. So it was, my mom and dad, very, very traditional, very conservative. But I look and I say that, I think I got the work ethic from my dad, and taking care of your family from my dad, and from my mom I got the sense of responsibility of service, because she could have gone and worked outside the house at any time, and even when all the kids were grown, she didn't look for a paying job. She just volunteered more. And when she volunteered with the Red Cross, she volunteered with the schools, and when they left Wilkes-Barre after the flood, we tried to rebuild our house, and it was just too damaged. We couldn't do anything with it, so we ended up selling the land, and they bought a house actually down in back to Berwick, Pennsylvania. Kind of moved back because she had some cousins back there, I believe. And she became the first trustee of their church. She became she was the first woman to get, it was some special award from the Red Cross, I don't remember what it was. We all used to do Meals on Wheels with her. And so we really, we learned about service from her. And that's something that stayed and continues to stay with me throughout my life. It's something that we stressed with every team that I ever worked with in my professional career, and student groups that I advise. It's all been about humble service, and you don't need credit for it. That's not why we do it. We do it because it's the right thing to do, and it needs to be done. And nobody has to, there's no chest thumping. That's one of those athletic things that just really wears on me the wrong way. Look at me. Yeah. No, that's just completely inappropriate. Look at all the people around you, because that's why you're successful. It's not because of you. It's not, nobody does anything on their own. It's always a, that concept of the community that lifts you up. That's what makes you successful.
You mentioned that you started swimming with your high school team, which I see here is Myers High School, in 5th grade.
Yep.
What drew you to swimming, I guess?
I think, well, we live very close to one of the outdoor community pools in Wilkes-Barre, a pool called Minor Park, and that was one of the pretty influential places. I'd say the Wilkes-Barre Y and Minor Park were pretty influential on my early youth. Those two places were where I learned how to swim. And funny kind of story that I'm happy I can tell, because I'm still here, is that my brother was 2 years older than me, and so he already knew how to swim. And we would go to the Y for swim lessons, and they had different groups in the pool, and they'd have the first 30 or 40 minutes of an hour were actual lessons, and they'd blow the whistle, and then there was 10 minutes of free swim. So when they blow the whistle, the kids who knew how to swim, climbed out of the pool, headed down to the deep end, and either off the diving board or in the water. And I just climbed out of the pool and went, and I didn't know how to swim. And they most of the time intercepted me before I got there, because I would just jump right in. And I just, didn't have the wherewithal to understand that I shouldn't be doing that. And I was hanging out underwater, just like, all right, now what do I do? And the lifeguard would jump in and grab me and pull me out. And they just kept saying to my dad, we need to teach him how to swim, because one of these times we're not going to see him. He's not going to go. So they would know that when the whistle blew, they had to snag me before I jumped in. So finally I learned how to swim, and just became an activity that it was like a family activity. My dad was involved in the Y. My brother, I was following my brother, which I did a lot in my life. Just kind of followed his path, and it was something that I became good at pretty quickly. When I was 10 years old, I was the runner-up at the YMCA state championships, and I went, oh, this is cool. Let's keep doing this. And my dad drove us all over the state. I mean, the trips that we made, to go, literally I think we hit every corner of the state. Summer swimming, we traveled all over the place. And it was a time probably before all the big clubs. It was just local clubs, the YMCA. And I think every town had a YMCA then. And so, we travel around Northeast Pennsylvania and swim at 8 or 9 different YMCAs. And then Myers High School was a pretty aggressive swimming program at that time. And whereas now, and it's, I'm guessing it's rules for the PIAA, we used to laugh because now I think they can start sometime mid-November, they start practice, and they're done by February, early March at the latest. Our first day of high school swim practice was the first day of school. The last day of high school swim practice was the day before the first day of school. We just went year-round. I mean, it never stopped. We went, but everybody was there because they wanted to be there. And there were no restrictions on seasons, and so kids who wanted to swim and wanted to get better, that's what they did. The ones who, wanted to swim and play basketball and play football and play baseball, they mixed it up. They did different stuff. But those of us who, decided that's what I wanted to do, then that's what you did. So we came, and it became a part of my, an important part of my high school experience, an important part of my college selection process. And my undergrad degree is business and econ. I worked in business for 6 years and said, nope, not what I want to do. I know what I want to do. And I was really very fortunate. I had some good networking and started coaching in college, and 38 years later said, yep, all right, let's wrap it up.
Well, you mentioned the PIAA was a little bit less restrictive or unregulated back when you started swimming.
Yeah.
Did you have any particular disciplines like freestyle, butterfly, distances that you were focused in on, or was it kind of just a free-for-all, whatever they were doing that meet is what you were?
Yeah, I think initially I Well, one of the things my dad wanted me to do and encouraged me to do was to do all the strokes. And I think I probably became better at butterfly a little quicker than a lot of other people, because it was a transition time in swimming for development of these strokes. Butterfly was the fourth stroke that was added to the other competitive strokes. And when they first started doing butterfly in the probably early 1950s, maybe late 40s, but no earlier than the early 1950s, or later than the early 1950s. They did butterfly with the arm stroke that's used today, but they used a breaststroke kick. And kind of awkward, but that's what everybody was doing. And that's how I initially learned how to do it. And there was, we saw changes coming, and we saw that this change that was going to come to butterfly was people were going to start doing a dolphin kick. And it was really hard. I mean, it was hard to coordinate the timing, and it was physically hard. And you were still allowed to do butterfly with a breaststroke kick, and that's what most people did. And my dad made me do the dolphin kick. And he said, everybody's going to be trying to catch up to you when they change the rule. And he said, and they are going to change the rule. You might as well change now. And so it actually paid off. So I swam butterfly a lot, I swam freestyle, and I swam some IM. And those are probably the things that I swam the most in high school. And my high school pool was a very unique situation. Instead of being 25 yards long, it was a 20-yard pool, built back in, I think, the 1920s or 1930s, when they were distances for track and field and swimming were similar. So with 20-yard pools, like in track then, they were running a 220 instead of a 200 meter. They were running a 440 instead of a 400 meter. And so in swimming, they were doing the same thing. So they built these 20-yard pools. Swimming transitioned pretty quickly. It didn't go to meters, but it went to yards races. So we were doing a lot of strange distances and strange lengths. So we did 5 lengths for 100 instead of 4. We did 10 for a 200. The upside of it was our team had probably the best turns of anybody in the district. No one liked to come swim at our pool because it was just so odd to swim there. But it was really, you tried to, if you could, you tried to learn everything. And it was also from a team standpoint. You never knew where you'd be needed. And when I was very young on the swim team, I wasn't the best butterflyer or the best freestyler, so I was looking for a place. Where's my slot? How can I be on this team? I want to be on the team. And there was a very strict regimen that you had to meet to get a letter. And, you got points for, scoring in an event, you got points for practice attendance, and I logged all that stuff throughout the year. And from my first day of high school practice, every day when I came home, I had it was a loose leaf binder, opened it up, and I memorized the practice, and I wrote down the practice every day, what I did, and closed that up. And then I kept a chart during swim season, so I knew exactly how many points I had, how many meets we had left, am I going to get a letter? What do I need to do in order to get, because that was important. That was a measurement of achievement, but it was also status. And you wanted to get a letter. And when you were in 9th grade, they gave you a letter sweater, which I still have it. It's wool, it's itchy. It's probably got holes in it, but it's something that I've kept forever. I don't think my son wants it. I don't think it'll get passed down anywhere, but maybe I'll give it to the museum. They can have it. But it was, and then I'd say in college I kind of went like a 180, because I started out my last 2 years of high school, kind of became a pretty good distance swimmer. And I think probably a character flaw, but I think the things that I picked were things that nobody else wanted to do. Because it just said to me, I'm tough, I can do this, nobody wants to do this, I'm going to do it. And so I became a pretty good distance swimmer. And then my freshman year in college, I was actually at the University of Connecticut. I followed my brother there on a swimming scholarship. Followed him blindly. It was probably the last place I should have gone. And after spending a year there, realized that this is not where I belong. And I, rescinded my scholarship and left and went to Bloomsburg for 3 years after that. When I got to Bloomsburg, I became a sprinter, which was so odd, because I went from swimming, the 1,000 freestyle to now I'm swimming the 50 freestyle and the 100 freestyle. And I remember sitting there the one day thinking, this is actually pretty cool, because I can just go down and back and get out. I don't have to swim 40 laps anymore. This is, and they were the races that I ended up competing at NCAA national championships in. And I don't know that I ever would have done that in distance. It could have, but I don't know. So it was a 180 for sure, and it was a lot of fun.
What was it about Bloomsburg that drew you there?
It was a school that I had looked at originally, and it was one of the schools on my list. And I remember it's so funny when I look back and see what my process was like, and know what high school students go through now in the process, and what my son went through, when I worked with him through his process. Our guidance counselors at that time, you'd go, I think I saw them once, maybe twice, but you'd go in and, growing up in Wilkes-Barre, they would say, well, you can apply to Wilkes, which is in Wilkes-Barre. You can apply to King's, that's in Wilkes-Barre, and you can go to Luzerne County Community College, that's in Wilkes-Barre. Really? That's it? That's all I can do? There's nothing else? And I just said, no way. I know my brother's looking, and I was a good enough athlete that there were some schools reaching out to me. I was being recruited, not heavily, but I had contact from Purdue, East Carolina, Rutgers. I wanted to look at Penn State, and I remember going down to Penn State, and the swim coach wouldn't talk to me, and I was so offended. So I could have, gone and just walked on, but I just said, never mind, he doesn't want me. I looked at Bucknell, and I think Bloomsburg was just, one of those places that when I finally gave it, maybe the attention that it deserved, and looked at, what was going on academically, what was going on athletically, that it seemed like it would be a place that I fit in, a place that they could use me. So I would still have a role, and be able to have a chance to get better. So and it was 45 minutes from Wilkes-Barre. I don't know, it was close, and it was literally the summer. I came home from the University of Connecticut in May 1972. June 21st, the river came over, and so even trying to make that process work, anything that was any further away than that, I don't know that I could have done it, out of logistics. Like, how do I figure out where I'm going to go, what I'm going to do? Because, we're trying to clean up, trying to rebuild a house, and I just said, Bloomsburg's right there, I'm going to do that. And it turned out to be a great decision. It was a excellent experience for me, academically, socially, athletically. Still get together, and this is 46 years ago I graduated. Still get together every summer with guys that I swam with guys that I was in a fraternity with. We have a couple golf outings every summer, and it's fun to just get together. And some people you still recognize, some we change a lot over the time. And when the old swimmers get together and they talk about what they swam in college and times that they did, I go, I don't remember you ever going that fast. I don't think so. Maybe, but I don't think so. But it's still fun, and we keep in touch. There's a lot of email threads. That's maybe the one thing I really like about the internet, is that we can keep in touch. There are things I don't like about it, but that's okay.
Well, you mentioned that you graduated from Bloomsburg with a degree in business. Mm-hmm. So, and you mentioned that you enjoyed the academics there. So I'm wondering what drew you to sort of business and learning more about it at Bloomsburg?
Well, I think And I don't regret my business background, because I think it was actually instrumental in me doing my job correctly as a swim coach, as an aquatics director, as a manager of a facility, the budgeting, the recruiting for competitive swimming, which is very intense and very, very time consuming. So I think that, the things that I learned in that field were helpful. But that probably wasn't why I went down that road. I think at that time, the conversations, the cultural and social conversations were, I know in my heart I wanted to teach and I wanted to coach, but the push was, won't make any money teaching and coaching. You need to go into business. And so I was, I'll be the first to admit that I was a really young college student. I wasn't 21 until halfway through my senior year. So I was immature when I started. I was probably immature when I finished. Probably still am, but I look back at that and say I did a lot of following and not a lot of listening to myself, probably. And so tried the business world, did some different things. Worked for at that time Roadway Express, which is a trucking company. Worked for Burroughs, but I worked for their not the computer branch, but their computer forms branch. Didn't care for it. Was a sales job. Didn't care for that at all. Worked in a bank in Scranton for a little while, and the good thing that came out of that was I met my wife. So no complaints about that. But the banking industry was changing dramatically. Anyways, it wasn't any, no more hometown banks. They all got gobbled up by the big banks. So did a lot of stuff, and finally, I just said, that's enough. I'm done. And I was volunteering to help a local swim team, and I had gotten back in touch with my college coach, and I had asked him. I knew he had a film that we had seen, and I wanted to borrow it from him to see if I could show it to this team. So we had started to reconnect, and I went down to Bloomsburg and had lunch with him, and we're sitting down there, and I was telling him, I said, I don't know how I'm going to do this, but I really want to try and make this career move, and I don't know how to do it. And he said to me, it's funny you should say that, because this is not exactly what you're talking about, but there was a guy in the PE department who had just gone out on a medical leave, and he said, we're in a jam, and we need somebody to teach his classes. And I said, do you think they would let me do that? Because, I wasn't certified to teach or anything. And he said, you can swim. He said, you can do these other things. And so I said, okay. And so they called me down back again and the department interviewed me. And it all went bang, bang, bang in a matter of days. And they offered me the position. So it was a one-semester position to fill in for this teaching sabbatical. I taught swimming, I taught archery, I taught bowling, I taught badminton, I taught volleyball. I had a bunch of classes, and it was awesome. It was wonderful. And at the same time, I volunteered to be an assistant coach and just help out, and got some good experience there. And we were sitting, it was in springtime, and we were sitting in the coach's office, and we were making phone calls for scheduling for the following year. And he called Hartwick College in Oneonta, New York, to schedule a meet. And the athletic director at Hartwick said, oh, it's funny that you called, because my swim coach just quit, just walked out the door. And my coach said, hold on a second, I'll let you talk to somebody who's interested in the job. And so he puts me on the phone, and we're talking. And now I've got like zero experience. I've got one semester of volunteer assistant experience. I had a good swimming background, but coaching nothing to speak of. And the athletic director at Hartwick College said to me, he said, here's the deal. He said, if you come up here this week, and he said, I'll give you a car, and he said, you need to drive to Northampton, Massachusetts. He said, there's a girl there that we're trying to recruit, and she's a multiple-time All-American. Her college closed. She was going to Eisenhower College. Her college closed. She needs to find a place to swim. If you can convince her to come to Hartwick, then you'll be our next head swim coach. So I go up, drive to Northampton. I have lunch with this girl and her mom. I will remember it forever. And at the end of lunch, we're talking, and I said to her, "So what do you think?" Now, I was not completely forthcoming. I didn't tell her I was not yet the coach. I said, "What do you think?" She said, "I think it's great. I'll see you in August." I said, "Okay, I'll see you." Drove back to Hartwick, gave him the keys to the car. I said, "She's coming." He stood up, shook my hand. He said, "You're our new coach." No application, no background checks, no nothing. Just, "You're the new coach." And it was just a great start. It was a lot of fun. Coached men's and women's swimming, intramural director, aquatics director, taught classes, made no money at all. It was like nothing. I can't believe I started for that little amount of money. But it was a great experience. Led me to my next job at Mary Washington, and then Mary Washington to here. But yeah, kind of an interesting route to my coaching career. But again, the business piece of it, I think was really valuable, and it taught me to write. Made me, I think, more comfortable with speaking. I've never been uncomfortable speaking. I probably talk too much. I know the kids on the swim team at Dickinson would always ask the bus driver when they got on the bus to not allow me to have the microphone. So.
Well, you mentioned that I had a few things here that I want to ask, but speaking of recruiting, it sounds like there were a few things that may or may not have helped you. I mean, you said you had a little bit of a background in sales, and so I'm wondering, was that useful at all?
I think it was, because, recruiting is sales, and that was the piece that I probably didn't like the most about sales. and I think it was because, I had a hard time separating, how would I put this, sales and whatever the product is, and myself. Mm-hmm. And so if I didn't really believe in what I was offering, I really struggled with that, because I felt I was lying, and being unethical. And I never had a problem doing that with my experience in higher ed and college swimming, because I always felt very proud of who I was working for, what we were trying to accomplish, and encouraging people to come join us. And I think I approached it in a different way too. I really, we approached everything from a team concept, and from the very first day that I coached, I made it a point, and I would share this with people, that I never refer to this as my team. It's not my team. I never refer to the athletes I work with as my athletes, and coaches do it all the time. It's just part of their vernacular. It's what they say. And I would always say, you're not my swimmers. I don't own you. I don't possess you. You are a member of our team. Our team. We're all part of this together, and I'm a part of the team too. We all have different roles. We have different responsibilities, and my role and my responsibility is to make all this work and to make those decisions. And we jokingly, used to say, you may live in a democracy, but this is not part of it, because I'm going to make the decisions. And I'm happy to listen to you, but once again, I'm going to make the decisions. And so I think the sales piece was helpful, but I think the organizational piece and the budgeting piece may have been just as helpful, because when you're trying to manage or administer a team of 48 student athletes, and you're planning practice schedules, and you're ordering gear, and you're getting a bus for a trip, and oops, don't forget about food, and then when you have meets that are 3 and 4 days long, we throw in the hotel and then transportation back and forth. And it's really, if you aren't a real structured, organized person, you're going to make mistakes. And the unfortunate outcome of those mistakes is that it hurts the swimmers, it hurts the athletes. And that's something I never ever wanted to do. If I was going to make a mistake, make it me. Not something that's going to hurt somebody on the team. But I felt really strongly about that we created a culture where everybody understood that we were all in this together. When we won together. When we lost together. Never pointed fingers, never took credit. There were meets that we would win by 1 point, out of a total of, it'd be 103 to 102. And I would say to them after the meet, I'd say, whose point was it? And, we've got someone sitting right here who won 3 events and scored 27 points. And somebody sitting over here got 5th place in 1 event and scored 1 point. So whose point was it? You tell me. And the point is everybody's. If everybody didn't do exactly what they did, we would not have won that meet. So we worked really hard to develop a culture that was very team-oriented, very, very supportive, and I think that, well, it shows. I've been retired for not quite a year now. Well, I guess a year. Still in touch with a lot of people. We've had 2 weddings so far this summer. We're on the perpetual wedding circuit. I went through the list with my wife the other day, and I said, there's still at least 12 more. They're not all next year, I said, but there's still at least 12 more that we're going to be at. And this past weekend, I was in Washington, D.C. The alums who lived down there, well, most of them lived there. Some of them also came from Philadelphia and New York. They wanted me to come down and spend the weekend with them. They got me an Airbnb and paid for it, just so we could all get together and spend time together. So it may sound cliche, but it's like it's a family for sure. And over the years, spent a lot of time counseling, not just coaching. A lot of times working with people on academic things, sitting either in my office or in the library, helping them work on a paper, And I always told them that, if you have a problem, come talk to me. We can work anything out. You might not like how it works out, but we can work it out. And I'm not going to fix it for you, but I'm going to tell you how to fix it. And then I'm going to support you and help you along the way. And so I think that maybe was one of the most important things, that we build that culture that creates that kind of bond. And winning's obviously important. Everybody wants to win, And I remember when 2 years ago, I guess it was, I had my 500th coaching career win, and somebody said to me, did you know that was 500? And I went, no, actually. Somebody told me, and I went, oh, that's good. And so the team got really excited about it, and I said, I didn't swim in any of those meets. I didn't score a single point in any of those meets. I said, you guys did all that, but we did, we did it together. I get it. So if it's a recognition, it's a recognition for all of us.
So I'm thinking, going back to, that you mentioned when you were in 5th grade, being very interested. I don't know if it was 5th grade exactly, but soon after you started swimming for your high school, keeping track of every practice, what you did, so it seemed like even back then you were very organized and detail-oriented.
I still have the notebook.
So I guess I'm wondering, did you do that all throughout your swimming career, or was that just sort of
I stopped writing workouts down when I got to college.
Okay.
I figured somebody else could take care of that now. I was hoping that I had good coaches and they were doing what they needed to do.
Well, one of the reasons I was asking that is I was wondering, did you use that as inspiration for your own, when you were now a coach and you had to develop workouts for the athletes that were on, sort of the Hartwick College team or the Mary Washington College team or the Dickinson College swim team?
Yeah, I think I was always a detail-oriented person, and I think that was part of the structure. And it was nice to actually see and helpful to see administratively how things changed over the 38 years that I coached. when I was at Hartwick and for the first few years at Mary Washington, there was nothing automated. Well, that's not exactly true, but the ability to produce reports was almost nil. So we had electronic timing systems, but it produced like a little tape on the machine, and then I would take that tape and I would transcribe it onto another form that was a results form. No computers. I did not have a computer when I was at Hartwick. There was a computer room on campus that I remember my last year there. They had put something in the campus news about, hey, if you want to come learn how to use this computer, and like nobody wanted to do it. And I said, I'll be right there. You know, I need to know this. I want to see this. And because my experience prior to that with computers was in college doing computer programming, where you key punch cards and you give the computer operator the stack of cards that was like, you know, this big, and they'd run it through their machine that was as big as this room, and then you get an error code. And you'd have to find the card that was wrong and go back and fix it. So this was really enticing to me. I said, this is cool. This is this little thing instead of this massive room. And then when I got to Mary Washington, we had a similar kind of timing system produced times on, what was that, dot matrix paper that rolled out like that. So that was a nice change. Still didn't give me the reports that I needed, so we had a three, I can't even remember what they were called, but hopefully you didn't have to use carbon, but it was 3 pages, and you wrote on one and it went through, so you could give a copy to the visiting team, a copy for yourself, and then maybe the newspaper or something like that. But it wasn't until we started hosting championship meets at Mary Washington that I actually got a computer. No one else in the department had a computer. And I got a computer because I had found this program called High-Tech Meet Manager, and it administered the meet, and it seeded things, and it did results, and it produced reports and everything. So I needed a computer and I needed a printer. It was not connected to the internet. I didn't have email. I had nothing like that. But it was such I look back over the changes from used to do index cards for entries, and I always, even when I first came to Dickinson for a long time, you had to turn in entry cards at meets for events, and I would always, at the end of the meet, I would get all those entry cards back, and then that night I would spend hours, and I would take each one of those cards and I would fill in the information. I had designed these cards so that I could put their final time, their place, how many points they scored on it, and I would fill that in, and then I would turn the card over and I would write them notes on every card about the splits, what we need to work on, what we need to fix, what was good, and I would fill the back of the card, and it would take me 4 or 5 hours, like after a meet, to do that. And then at the next practice, they'd come in and we had a little mailbox system set up, and they'd all get their cards. And to this day, some swimming alums who I talk to, they'll tell me they still have those cards. They kept them. And then we got to the point where the high-tech meet manager program also had a team manager program. The two of them interfaced, and you were able to send meet information to team manager and then produce reports by going click, click, click. And now what took me 5 hours to do, I did in like 30 seconds. Now it didn't have that personal touch, but I would take that results sheet that they got and I would still write some notes on them. Or sometimes it'd be simple as, see me about your third 50. See me about your start, about your turn, whatever. And then we could have this kind of conversation, and it wasn't something, it was something that was going to be productive. But to watch the change over the years from when I first started swimming, of stopwatches with sweep second hands that might have had fifths of a second in there on the little dial somewhere, and parents writing out ribbons, and to what we have now, this instant result from a touchpad to a jumbo screen to reports that can go all over the world. It's been wild, absolutely crazy.
Well, you mentioned sort of that change over time. I'm wondering, you were at Harvard for a few years, then you went to Mary Washington in Fredericksburg, PA. How did you end up at Dickinson?
Good question, and I think it was, like each one of the moves that we made were kind of interesting, because I remember when we moved from New York to Virginia, we were actually at
Or Fredericksburg, Virginia.
yeah, but we were at a dinner at Harvard College, and there was a speaker, and they were talking about demographics, and he put a slide up, and it was a nighttime picture, a satellite nighttime picture, and so it showed lights. And he was talking about, shifting population. So here's one from, 1970, and here's one from 1980. And you can look at, and you can see the changes. And I was sitting there alongside my wife, and I said, oh, look at Virginia, look at all the lights in Virginia. I said, there's a lot of growth there. I said, that might be interesting. And literally, somebody sent me, I'm trying to remember how that actually happened. There was actually a swimming official who was an official all the time. I was swimming as a competitor, and he also knew my dad because my dad was a swimming official. And he had seen this posting of this job at Mary Washington, and he sent it to me. Just out of the blue, he sent it to me. And so we talked about it, and I said, well, I don't know, let's go look at it. And I went down, and it just looked like a great opportunity, and it was something new, and it was a lot warmer than upstate New York was.
Was in the middle of nowhere.
Woo! Upstate New York was chilly. We had snow on graduation all the time up there. It was wild.
Less hills, too.
Yeah, well, Hardwick is
Yep.
on a hill, so we used to joke about the pool being the only flat spot on campus, and I wasn't sure that was even true. But so it was just kind of one of those things that we went to Virginia. I remember the conversation, and I just said to my wife, I said, can you think of any reason not to go? And she said, not really. And I went, all right, let's do it. And then when we were in Virginia, I turned 40, and it was kind of one of those moments, one of those professional moments and personal moments where you say, I only have one more move left if I'm going to move. Because I'm 40 years old, the amount of money I'm making now, if I go much longer, nobody's going to want to pay me. They can hire somebody with less experience for less money. And so we just, this job at Dickinson came available, and I started looking at it. And it was also a time when our families, which were all in the Pennsylvania area, were starting to experience a lot of health problems. And so we basically just decided that this was the time to do it. It's the last chance to go. And so applied for the job, got offered the job, and timing was good. Instead of 6 hours to our families, we were 2 hours to our families. So we were able to help out. My mom and dad and my wife's mom and dad both, became ill. My brother was ill. And it was also I used to joke about it was the perfect distance that, if we wanted to get there, we could. And if I didn't want to go to my sister's party for her little girl for the birthday, I could say it's too far. We're just far enough away that it's okay. Edit that out. So sorry, Diane. But it was, and then I also, I think we looked and investigated Dickinson maybe more than most students do when they're picking a college, because we knew this was going to be the last move. And I wanted to be someplace that I could really be proud of, that I could be vested in. And Dickinson was and still is obviously, a great institution. Carlisle was kind of like a throwback town. It reminded me, even though it wasn't as big as Wilkes-Barre, neighborhood elementary schools, sidewalks. Virginia didn't have any sidewalks. It was all, these subdivisions that they built that they just threw up houses real quick. And so this was like getting back into a small kind of city where you could walk places, where there was community. And so we just looked at this as being a great opportunity. And also from a professional standpoint, that year, I remember that year, the previous year, being at the national championships for swimming and looking at the scoreboard, and the top 10 teams on the scoreboard, or the top 9 of the 10, were all private schools. There was only one state school there. And we had experienced the budget crunch of, state schools. And in a lot of states, the legislature balances the budget on the back of higher ed. And so we had been through several years of no pay raises and things like that. And I just said, I don't think I want to stay in a state environment, state-run environment. I think I want to go to some place where, I know it costs more, but they make decisions about what they spend, based on what their mission is and what their objectives are, nothing political. Well, that was foolish. I mean, clearly it was political too, but at least that's what I thought then. So, but we just thought that it was a good move personally. My son, it was perfect for my son. He was just going into first grade when we moved here, and we went from he had a 45-minute bus ride to kindergarten in Virginia, and we bought a house right behind the Moreland Elementary School. He had a 45-second walk to school. So it was perfect. And no regrets.
I was going to say, I kind of laughed a little bit when you said that you spent more time investigating the school than most students. And I was going to say it worked out well because, you spent more than 4 years there. So
yeah, sense. Well, we used to joke that, when I retired, I said to the team, I said, I've tried for 26 years to graduate, and I couldn't. And now I finally graduated. I'd like to say I have 26 years worth of knowledge, but I'm not sure that's true. But it was a great ride for sure.
Now, so what was Dickinson like, and I guess more broadly, what was Carlisle like when you first came? You mentioned a little bit about the neighborhood feel, but I'm wondering if you could expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, my guess is that both have changed dramatically, and I'm not sure that I've seen it because I've been part of the change. Sure. But I remember, I literally remember the first time I came to Carlisle, and I drove in on East High Street, and I didn't know where I was going, but I had directions, and I knew I was going to be here a few days, so I wanted to get some information. So I stopped. Trying to think where we are. The JFC staffing building used to be a Sheetz.
Yeah.
And so I stopped. That was the first place I stopped in Carlisle because I wanted to get a paper. I wanted a newspaper. And then while I was there, they have the magazine things that you pick up. I picked up a bunch of that stuff, realtor stuff and stuff like that so I could take it home for my wife. So I remember going into that Sheetz and grabbing a newspaper and then driving onto campus. And it was a very different kind of feel for me because every other school that I had been at was like a campus up on a hill, isolated, away. And this was like, this campus is literally right in the middle of town. It's split by a street, by a big road. There's traffic, there's cars. And I thought about that for, sitting in my car in the parking lot down at the Klein Center, and I'm thinking about that. And I'm thinking, I'm not sure about this. And then I said, but you know what? This is going to appeal to a lot of people who don't want to be isolated, and I think there's some really good things that can come from this. And so that at that point I kind of just put that away. It didn't intimidate me at all. I thought the buildings were really nice. It was a real pretty adventure. And my interview process was 2.5 days. It was forever. I mean, I think I met everyone on campus. I'm pretty sure I did. And one of my very last interview, I remember walking by my truck several times thinking I should just get in my truck and go home. I was exhausted. But my last interview was with the dean of the college, George Allen. And I went into his office and we shook hands, pleasantries, and he said, so why do you want to be at Dickinson? And I looked at him and I said, well, I'm not sure I do. I said, that's what this process is about, right? You're interviewing me, I'm interviewing you, and we're both going to make decisions, and maybe they won't. And he just looked at me and he said, you're the first person who's ever had the nerve to actually say that to me. And he said, I kind of like that. We became great friends. He was just a neat guy. He was just an intriguing, very, very smart guy. But we were able to be honest with each other, and I was exhausted. And I said to him, "I'm really sorry, I'm just exhausted." And he said, "It's okay." He said, "I get it." But it was, I drove home and don't remember much of the ride home because thinking I had driven around town and everything. And it just reminded me in some ways, but I think in an even nicer way, because I think this city, it's definitely nicer than I think what a lot of Wilkes-Barre has become. Wilkes-Barre has changed a lot over the years, and it's hard to go home. I mean, don't we romanticize the past?
Yeah.
So it's not even fair to make that kind of statement. But it reminded me, of being in a city where you could walk everywhere, and we probably live in about a 5-block radius. It's just, we live right behind the Moreland Elementary School. I walk up here into town, it's 5 blocks, So I just remember thinking that this was a really nice place that I could bring my family to, and they would be very happy here. Carlisle schools were awesome for my son. And I remember when we decided to move here, some friends of mine said, "Oh, don't move to Carlisle. You don't want to go there. Move to Boiling Springs, or move to, go to Cumberland Valley or whatever." And I went, "No way." I said, this is where we want to be. We want to be right here. And also I wanted to be really close to the college, because I'm not smart enough to live far away. I get to work and I realize I left something at home that I need, or I get home and I left something at work that I need. And so I needed to be close, because I just wasn't very bright. So.
No, you mentioned, and I've been to Hartwick and I've been to Bloomsburg. I haven't been to Mary Washington or Storrs, where Yukon is. But no, you're right. Dickinson, I think, is unique in a lot of ways. And, I mean, Elizabethtown is the same way, where a lot of these campuses are sort of, there's a very clear divide. And Dickinson, you're right, is right.
Well, and it was part of recruiting. I think you talk about the elephant in the room. You don't try and hide it, because you can't. There's an 18-wheeler coming down the street. What do you got to talk about it? And when I would talk with families, I'd say to them, it's very obvious, that we were dropped right in the middle of this town. And I said, and there's some really good things that come out of that. I said, first of all, you don't forget how to cross streets, because students forget and then they do stupid things. I said, but honestly, it becomes an extension of the community. Students do community service in town, they do internships in town, they walk 2 blocks to shop, they do, we are part of this community. And it's become even more so when things change, and I don't know how long ago it was, but when things changed and college students were allowed to register to vote where they were going to school. That was a big deal. I mean, most college communities didn't want that. They didn't want the college kids voting for their local elections. And the reality is, most of the time they didn't. The only time they voted was when it was a state or a national election. But that scared small towns that had colleges in it when they were allowed to do that. I think it still does to some degree.
Well, sort of circling back to the beginning of our conversation, when you mentioned your mother and the importance of community service, were you able to implement that more at Dickinson because of the, connection between the college and the town, or the closeness?
I think so, and I think we used some of those connections to do things. And what we always tried to do, we tried to make sure that we did some service for the college, something for the Carlisle community, and then something bigger, maybe something national. And so that what the national thing became pretty quickly was Relay for Life. And we kind of took that on, and I became the faculty advisor for Relay for Life. And we had, the swim team was many years the highest fundraising group for Relay for Life. They were always the biggest presence at Relay for Life. We did it as a team. And everybody went, and everybody stayed up all night, and we had a blast. It was just it got harder for me over the years, staying up all night, but I did it. And someone said to me one time, it was another, I can't remember if it was a student, but I don't know if it was another team or whatever. And they said, how come the swim team is the only team that stays, all night for Relay for Life? And I said, I'm there. if I'm there, they're going to be there.
Yeah.
And if other coaches don't do that, why would their teams come and stay? They won't do it. So, I mean, there's your opportunity to lead by example and do something together as a team. And everything we did, service-wise, we all did together. In town, we did things for, well, it used to be Carlisle Cares. When Cares first started, I was part of a group of people who tried to get this started and get it into the churches. Back when it started, we recruited 12 churches to each take a month. I ran the month at Allison Church because that's where we went to church. I ran it with some other people. I drove the van oftentimes, shuttling people to when the churches were out of town. We did whatever we could do. So we were pretty involved with that. And that involvement, I think, of the swim team doing some of that stuff also reached over into some other groups on campus doing that. At a time when they were trying to build the brand of Carlisle Cares, a class in political science doing a project took on a marketing and advertising project for Carlisle Cares, and 2 of the people in that class were swimmers. So they, that connection was there already, and they started doing that. We used to do things like we did a sock drive, and what I would say to them is that if your feet are cold, your body's cold. If your feet are wet, your whole body's wet. You don't understand, and it is. We know for a fact that the most asked for item in clothing places for homeless people are socks. So we do a sock drive, and sometimes we did it different times. Sometimes they would bring the socks in. Sometimes they would, each lane would just be responsible for, $12, and they would go into their dorms and they would knock on doors and say, hey, can you give me a quarter or whatever? Can you give me $1? And they would come back, and then I'd take all the money and I'd go to Walmart and I'd buy every pair of socks they had in Walmart, in a cart, and we'd take them down to the shelter. We started doing, quite a while ago, we did a Thanksgiving winter clothing drive, and I would tell the team, you're going home for Thanksgiving, look in your closet. I know that you have a jacket in there you don't wear anymore. I know you have a sweatshirt somewhere that you don't wear anymore. And I said, I'm going to bet that your siblings do also, and your mom and dad do too. So whatever is not being worn, bring it back, put it in bags, bring it back. And we would have 12 bags of clothing in the back of my truck that we would take down to Carlisle Cares. And it was just, and I would take different people from the team with me all the time so that they could see this, so they could see the thankfulness of these people. It was like Christmas, that, and some of the stuff that the kids are donating still had tags on it. They just never wore it. And so here's a brand new sweater or a brand new sweatshirt or something that somebody's getting, and now they're going to be warm. Homelessness is a terrible issue. I was in D.C. and the tent camps all over Washington, D.C., our nation's capital. It's horrible. It's just sad. And I don't have the answers for it, but that doesn't mean that we don't stop trying to help. So we did food drives. We volunteer for things on campus all the time. Anytime anybody needed help, we work at the college farm. Help out with admissions events, you name it. They did it. We had a good connection. Tim Scott is a good friend of mine, and I would always talk to Tim and say, hey, anything going on in town that you need us for? And if it was something going on, we'd help out. So yeah, I think staying connected in the community, whether it was through church or Dickinson for the longest time had an office called ComServe, Community Service. I don't know what it's named now. The names change administratively all the time, but they knew that they could, if they needed a large group of people, they just called us and we'd be there. And the other groups I work with a group called Scroll and Key. That's 7 senior men every year that are selected by their predecessors, and it's a service leadership group, and so the focus is on service, and they make decisions every year about what they think is important, because it's 7 different men every year, and it's not, I'm not telling them what to do, but, guiding them through service. And they bring their personal experiences, and through that, they decide what are the things they want to focus on.
I mean, so you also gave me it seemed like you kept quite busy while you were at Dickinson, especially in the last 15 years or so.
Yeah.
Was there anything else that stood out to you, any other clubs or committees?
I was able, when I first came to Dickinson, there was a different structure academically, and we were, the people in the athletic department were classified as academic professionals, and it was kind of a hybrid, that there was a transition from strict faculty positions, recognizing that these positions were different, but they still had, this level of importance. And in that classification, I was able to serve on a lot of academic committees, which I really enjoyed. I was on the academic program committee, and that was, really digging into the meat of academics. We worked on the general ed requirements. We approved department requests for, new courses. It was really interesting to see a different part of the college. And then we were reclassified again as administrators, which basically took us out of all of that stuff. So I couldn't be on those committees anymore. And I think I then leaned a little bit more towards student groups. And some of them were groups that I guess that I might have had like a natural affinity for, but others were because they needed help, and somebody said to them, "Why don't you go ask Coach Richards? He'll help you." And so I think for 2 years I advised a fraternity. Didn't work real well, but I advised a fraternity. Fraternities at Dickinson, and I think in a lot of places, have struggled to find their place. And I think they have struggled to be able to articulate where they fit into the mission of a college and into the strategic plan. And what I said to the fraternity that I was working with was, I said, your main objective right now needs to be to figure out, look at the strategic plan, look at the mission statement and the vision of the college, and you need to figure out where you fit in there and be able to articulate that. And you need to have meetings with administration and show them. And if you can't do that, then it's going to be a short time span. We're not going to see many fraternities around here anymore. And that's one of the things that has happened at Dickinson. They're just not, and some people will say the school went after them, and I don't think that's true. I just think it was, changing times, changing cultures, and they weren't able to see where they fit in, because it is different. It's much different than it was in the 60s and 70s and the 80s. But I also became involved with a group that originally was called Allies. It was the LGBTQ support group on campus, and I became involved because my son in his sophomore year of college told me he was gay, and I knew nothing, and I felt like I am so uneducated and unprepared. I need to get a little smarter. Did some research, found some good groups online that I was able to get involved with. A group called PFLAG, which is Parents and Friends of Lesbians and Gay Individuals. But also found out that there was this group on campus that was really, I guess you would say they were closeted, that they didn't want anybody to know about them because they were afraid. And I thought they might have some resources, and I sent them an email, and I said, do you have any books? Do you have a library? Do you have anything that that I can look at? Well, they didn't answer, and I sent them another email, and I sent them another email, and then finally a student showed up at my office, and they said, "Why do you keep sending us emails?" And I said, "Because I would like some help. I want some books." And she said, "Well, we thought you were some kind of weirdo, like just trying to find out what's going on, and, we didn't trust you." And I explained to her what was going on, and so they kind of, they talk, and they kind of drew me in, and it wasn't too long after that their advisor wasn't available, and they asked me to be their advisor. And I was able to be a different voice for them, to be that parent voice, and to be there to help them, because it's for many kids when they come out to their parents, it's really very, very difficult and not the result that they hope for. Sometimes it's a very, very bad result. And so, I offered myself as a resource that, if you want to talk about how you're going to do this, and I'd say, don't do it on Thanksgiving, don't do it on Christmas. That's not how you do this, But, let's talk about this. And I was also able to help them, since I was here for a significant amount of time, help them maneuver around the administration and, get some things done. Because students they don't know how to play those games. And so I think one of the most important things a group advisor can do is be able to send them in certain directions and not send them in other directions. That's not who you want to talk to about this. Let's go over here and talk to this person. We'll get this done. So my wife used to joke and just say that your name's on a list and everybody knows. It's the I can't say no list. And I just say, if I can do it, I will. If I can't do it, then I'm not going to do it, because I don't want to let them down. I tried to get involved with as much as I could. Got real involved in PE the last 5 or 6 years. I became the chair of the PE department, and unfortunately we lost the PE requirement, which is sad, but I think it's a trend. I look back at when I was in school, pretty much every college had a PE requirement, and many colleges had swimming requirements. Like, you had to pass a swimming test to graduate. And that was, the biggest nightmare for some kids, they, can't swim and scared to death. But we were able, for a lot of years, we were still able to teach PE here, and I taught one of my favorite classes I started when I got here. There wasn't a transition in skill level in teaching classes, and so I created a non-swimming beginners class. And so it was designed for students who could not swim at all, had a fear of the water maybe, or just, very, very uncomfortable. And it was the most fun class that I taught. It went from day one of literally tears to, most of these kids would end up that they would be able to jump in deep water, come up and tread, and then swim across the diving well at the deep end of the pool. And the objective was to make them safe, but to also teach them about water safety so that they don't do anything foolish. And I can, remember, jumping into deep water with these kids, and I'm holding their hand. I'm saying, we're going on 3, and they're saying, I don't know, and I'd start counting 1, 2, and they start pulling back, and I'd say, don't pull back, and 3, and I'd pull them into the pool, and they're screaming, jumping into the pool, and they come up, and they're okay, and they look at me and they say, can we go again? I say, yep, let's go, let's do it again, and get them to the point then when they can do it by themselves. And I think those classes were some of the most satisfying things. And I hear from, students who I taught to swim 20 years ago, who will send me an email and say, hey, I just want to let you know I was swimming yesterday and I thought about you. So it's fun.
Well, I was going to say, it looks like, that seems to be, in addition to the water safety, you focused a lot surprisingly on sort of pools and
Yeah, I have a unique, my graduate degree is kind of unique. And I was so happy that I was able to find this, because I knew the path that I was going down. I had to have a graduate degree, and it needed to be out of the business field. It needed to be more, if aquatics was where I was going, that's what it needed to be. So I was introduced to a program at Indiana University of Pennsylvania back in 1982, probably, I think. It was the year that I was helping coach, and we went to the conference championships at IUP, And I met the coach there, who was also the aquatic director, and he was the creator of this degree program that was very unique. And it was a master's in sports sciences, and it had several branches, like specialty areas. One of the specialty areas was psychology, one was administration, one was athletic training, one was sports information, and one was aquatics. And so this program was a specialty program for aquatic facility management and design. And there was this cohort of people that we all went through this program together, and it was a big group. And it was really, the people who came out of that went to some of the biggest facilities in the country. I have friends who went to University of Texas, Austin, they were working, Emory University in Atlanta, Ball State in Indiana, all over the place. There are a lot of the people who have written a lot of the most technically oriented stuff about, aquatics. So it was really kind of special. And I think I know for a fact that in the end, it was so beneficial to me for my career, because not just because it created some opportunities, which I think it did, but because it allowed me to manage these facilities in ways that made it better for the athletes that I worked with. Because a lot of pools that you go to, frightening. Water quality and air quality, horrendous, not safe in any way. And I think that pretty much everybody who swam at Dickinson and Mary Washington and Hartwick would probably say that they felt very comfortable in the environment that they lived in, basically. Because when you're an athlete, you spend 20 hours a week in that environment, and you can either be in a place where you can't breathe, or you can be in a place where you can actually perform your craft, because the air quality allows you to breathe. And so it was, and then also I think that, that organizational piece, that anal piece of me, that doesn't accept anything that's not right, and I would just not ever accept dirt. I just couldn't do it. Our pools were always spotless. Somebody said, I remember they came in, they said, "Oh, you could eat off this floor." And I said, "Maybe you could, but I wouldn't." So, bare feet, all that kind of stuff. So I think it was, the aquatics piece has been really important, and I think it was beneficial for the development of all those programs. And I was able to do, when I was in Virginia, I did more consulting work, more pools, and more growth. So I did more stuff down there. And when we got to Dickinson, I kind of shied away from that as much, because I had more I had to do here. And there's only so many hours in the day, and also my son was getting a little older, and I think you make decisions about family and work balance, and I don't think I ever did it well. I think I did too much work, but I tried whenever I could to make sure that I eliminated something. It's like growing up, I was a good golfer. I don't golf. It takes too much time. And when my son was growing up, I said, I can't take all day on Sunday and go golf. I was gone all day yesterday for a swim meet. I need to spend time with my family. So you make decisions. And so I walked away from, we did a little consulting when we were up here, but not a ton.
Well, you mentioned a few people both in the community, Mayor Scott, and I think the first dean at Dickinson. They interviewed you. I'm wondering if there's anyone else that really stands out in your mind as that you worked really well with or was really beneficial.
When I first got here, the guy who hired me was Les Pullman, who was the athletic director at Dickinson. And he is still to this day a very good friend of mine. We'll get together once in a while for a drink. Both of his kids worked for me at the Klein. And I remember when we were looking at this job, and I said to my wife, I said, how can this not be the right thing to do? The guy's name is Poolman. I said, we got to go. So we can't not go. He was a great supporter. He believed in me. he, did everything he could to get me the resources that I needed. We never got what we needed completely. You never do.
Yeah.
But, you do the best you can with what's available. And he was always willing to, to fight for me and help me get whatever we needed. I would say that when we first got here, Karen Lehman, who was the pastor at what was Allison Church at that time, and unfortunately she died from pancreatic cancer, but she was just a driving force in the church and the community, and she was an alum. I think she was a Dickinson alum. I'm pretty sure she was. So she was, she was a big part of our family. Important, and her husband Jay still lives in the community, and I still see him, and I'm actually going to start working with him on a committee as the United Methodist Church comes to its struggle. It's probably going to split, and so he asked me if I would be willing to work with him and some other folks on a committee at the church to determine which way the church goes. So it will be interesting to see. I get the sense that, I don't know if it's the whole, a majority of the church or half of the church or whatever, but, half of the church wants to be inclusive and wants to be welcoming and wants to be accepting, and the other half, or the other whatever amount, is still not there yet. So I think they're going to try and see if there are ways to move more people to one side, but I suspect there'll be a split in all the Methodist churches within the next year or so. So that's, and it was, for me, it was honestly sad when the church was sold to the college. We went there for 18 years, and it wasn't the same, but things change. I'm just trying to think. We've just met so many people, so many friends. It's hard to, kind of go down the list, and it's also hard to kind of remember,
Yeah.
not literally remember, but where do these people fall in this experience? Because so much has changed, in 26 years. Like I said, from Sheets to. The Hamilton's still here. A lot of new restaurants, a lot of places gone. Culture has changed dramatically. I got my first cell phone when we moved here, and it was like as big as a shoebox. It had an antenna, and we got it because we were concerned about emergencies. So all we had was an AT&T emergency plan. It was 10 minutes of talk time you had, and that was it. And so it was just if you got in a car accident, you had a phone and you could call somebody. So clearly things have changed, and the way people do business, has changed. I was in a restaurant this past weekend, and they have little Q codes on the tables, and you scan that and you get the menu and you order, and it tells them what table you're at, and it bills you, it takes your credit card, does everything. And I went, I have questions. I'm not ready to order. I have questions. How do I ask questions? So a lot of change.
Well, I definitely want to ask you about the student athletes that were part of the various teams. So I'm sure there are way too many to. Yeah,
and it's, again, great folks. I have, I'm still in touch with that girl that I talked to you about, and another guy from Hartwick.
Eisenhower.
Yeah, and another guy who I coached up there, and he had his 60th birthday a little while ago, and I called him and I said, excuse me, this has to be a mistake. How could this possibly be so? But it's great. I mean, the great memories of a lot of folks, and they've all been part of the journey. And I can tell them that most of them that I remember the first time you sat down in my office. you know, and you came with your mom and dad, and I can tell you what you were wearing.
Well, I have a question. So you mentioned that you're still in touch with the student or the All-American that you had to recruit to Hartwick. Did you ever tell her that?
No.
No?
No, she never heard the story. No.
So yeah, so if it wasn't for her, who knows where?
Well, exactly.
else it could have been.
Yeah, exactly. And so, you know, those funny moments in your life where something happens, and I think that's why, you know, I don't think we should ever have regrets. You know, like somebody said, "Oh, do you regret not doing this?" And I said, "If I did that, this wouldn't have happened, and this wouldn't have happened, and we probably wouldn't be sitting here, you asking me that question." You know, I mean, it's because, no, I mean, that's your life. That's what happened.
I remember my alma mater asked me to, you know, sort of talk about my career path, and I was telling my wife beforehand, I said, you know, I can offer advice, but it seems like what led me to this current moment is just a bunch of really random occurrences that I was just really fortunate to.
Yeah, and you were prepared, so when that random occurrence happened, you were able to, you know, open that door and step through it. And I think that's, you know, that's the key, that, you know, you're ready, and you know, you learned how to think critically and analytically, and all those things are really helpful. And I think that, you know, the other thing that maybe has been a significant part of our time here have been my dogs.
Yeah.
I have been identified, you know, I went from being identified, you know, as my son's father, I was Paul's dad, and then the dogs, I'm Tucker's dad, and all the kids on the team, you know, depending on when they were here, they knew a different dog. Because I always had them over to the house. We did some events at the house, and so they knew a different dog. And my current dog, Jake, started finding out that over the last maybe 7-8 years, that students are just inundated with digital information, and they're very poor managers of their email. They do a terrible job, and so had to kind of figure out ways that, and again, that was the way we had to communicate, but how do we make it more effective? And so Jake, my dog. And they would be like a running commentary of me having a conversation with the dog, but the points I'm making are points I want to, you know, get to them. And I would get text messages from them, you know, like 11 o'clock at night, in the library, laughing out loud. They're asking me to leave because I just read your email from Jake. But he became like this celebrity on the swim team. You know, they all knew him.
Yeah.
And you know, when I talk to them, they say, "How's Jake?" How about how's my wife? How about how am I doing? It's how's Jake? They love it. But it was, and they will tell you that, you know, they read the emails because they wanted to see what was coming next. Because I've got a warped sense of humor, and you know, I'd have these conversations, and you know, we had a conversation about people on their phones. You know, because I was kind of a dinosaur, and you know, when we have swim meets, I say it's a no phone zone. You know, you can't be on your phone during a meet. You see a football player on their phone on the sideline during a football game? I don't think so. And we would do other things where there were no phone zones. But I came to realize that it was a cultural, societal problem, because we'd be in Florida training, and we'd go to dinner, and we'd always go to some nice place like on a dock. And it was just really pretty. And I'd say, phones off, put them away. You know, this is your opportunity to actually talk to your teammates, you know, get to know them a little better. And they'd all turn them off, and it was fine. And we're leaving the restaurant, and they all turn their phones on, and they have 5 messages from their parents. "Where are you? I'm calling the police. I can't find you. You didn't respond to my text." You go, come on, you know, really?
A little bit different than when you were growing up.
Yeah. And so I get it. Things are different. And people would always say to me, you know, "Oh, the students today aren't like they used to be." And I'd say, "You're absolutely right. They can't be. They wouldn't. I wouldn't have survived in this world. It's just no. I mean, they have to be completely different because the world's different." So.
Well, I always end by asking, if there's anything I should have asked or that you want to say before we turn off the camera.
I don't think so. I think it's actually been it's been fun, for me to kind of look back and reminisce a little bit. And I was introduced. I don't know if I was introduced or there was a comment made in a committee that I was in, where they said, Paul brings a very valuable historical perspective to our conversations. And I just looked and I said, are you kidding me? That's all I'm good for is historical perspective. I know I've got an institutional memory, but I have other things, that I can do. But it's nice to have these conversations, and it's been fun to see the changes in Carlisle, and also see certain things, as we keep changing things coming back. Today right down on the square, Farmers on the Square, that took a while for that to kind of recycle and come back again, but it's awesome.
Well, while we were talking, I thought of a question, so
That's
it wasn't my last question, but you mentioned that you retired last year, and I know you have. You mentioned you're doing a camp next week for individuals with type 1 diabetes.
Right.
So I'm wondering, how is retirement? Seems like you're keeping
it's getting
so
better. It's getting better because we're not all on lockdown as much, so it's getting better. And the Diabetes Training Camp Foundation is a group that I started working with about 6 years ago, I think, and that's a Carlisle connection, which is interesting. Ann Cook, who died just this past year, and was an icon in the Carlisle School District. Her and her family always sat like one row behind us in church. So I had known Ann forever. She was also involved in the YMCA. She officiated all of our swim meets at Dickinson. She was very involved in swimming. And one year, I guess 6 or so years ago, she called me and she said, Paul, I have a question I want to ask you. And she said, it's actually a question from Jody. Jody was her daughter. And she said, Jody's husband, who was an endocrinologist, founded this group called Diabetes Training Camp. It's a multi-sport camp for adults with type 1 diabetes. And they're hoping to maybe make some changes in their swim program. And I told Jody that I thought that you would be great. Would you, be interested in doing this? And I said to her, Ann, this isn't fair because I've never said no to you on anything. And I said, yeah, I'll do it. And she said, well, I can get you more information. I said, just tell Jody to call me. I said, I'll do it. I'm happy to help out. It has been one of the most wonderful things I've ever done. It's just, it's made me appreciate my own life, and made me understand and respect the challenges that people face with diabetes. Because you don't think about it, but it's, there's no break, there's no vacation. It's there every day. And I don't think about what I eat in the morning or what I drink in the morning when I get up. They need to plan. They need to do whatever it is they have to do, and they need to be ready for medical emergencies just like that. I mean, anything can happen. And yet these people are trying to, become more fit, better athletes. Some of them, training for world-class races. Some of them we run a program, it's called Couch to 5K. And it literally, takes somebody from, I haven't done anything except watch TV and eat potato chips, but I want to run a 5K. And we take them through that program. So we've got a staff, a medical staff that is brilliant, absolutely amazing, a counseling staff, a nutritional staff, coaching staff for swimming, cycling, and running. And we get people from all over the world who come to this. And our staff is international from all over the world. So it's really, for me, they asked me to do this saying, could you please help us? And for me, it's like, this is an honor, that you asked me to do this. I'm thrilled to be a part of this team and to actually do this. It was tough during the pandemic because this is an important community. One of the things that becomes very evident quickly with this group is that for a lot of these folks, this is the first time they've ever met anyone else with type 1 diabetes. And so they have never had a community before to ask questions. And so now they make these friends, they have this online community where they can get online and say, hey, you know, when I did this, this happened. Anybody else ever have that problem? 20 people will respond like that with, oh yeah, I had the same thing happen, this is what I did, or this is what I did. And the doctors will respond. I mean, it's like free medical care, you know, and we're talking world-class medical advice.
Yeah.
And so it's such a community. So not being able to do camp last year was really hard. So we did several virtual camps, which is a challenge, but it still kept them connected. And next week will be our first time back in person since the start of the pandemic. And so when I announced my retirement, it was like 1 week pre-pandemic. I didn't know anything about this coming, you know what I mean? But I announced my retirement, and then students went on break, and over break they pulled the plug on everything. So it was kind of, you know, everything was shut down, and now things are obviously open back up again, traveling a little bit, you know, doing some things, enjoying, you know, being out and about and hoping we don't screw this up and go backwards.
Well, again, thank you so much for coming in and talking to me a little bit about sort of your background in Carlisle and Cumberland County. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.